Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Test Tube Plus again today. This is episode 2 of 5 in our series on movies. I don't know what that would be in movie speak. It's not a trilogy, it's like a quintilogy, but either way, we are talking about movies all week on Test Tube Plus. When did we start making them, and how did we capture these moving images, and how our brains then perceive them, because it's an illusion, really. We're also going to talk about 3D movies and sound and all sorts of great stuff later this week, so make sure you subscribe, and also make sure you check out yesterday's episode about where movies even came from. But today we're talking about how we capture moving images. For a long time, the smartest and most inventive people in the world, they all worked on the problem of capturing moving images. We've got high-definition movie cameras in our pockets today, but there were technological hurdles along the entire path between those 2 points. Your phones and your GoPros and all of that, they all capture moving images digitally. That obviously didn't come around until much more recently. Most photographs throughout the history of photography have been captured on film or on plates or by a physical medium. The first photographs were captured on glass plates. So light would enter a camera through the lens and leave an impression on a piece of glass that was coated in silver and iodine. Sometimes instead of glass, it could also be tin, but the heavy pieces of glass or metal, obviously you can't swap those out, at 10 or 12 or 20 frames per second. You couldn't do that fast enough to turn it into a moving image. The guy who you might remember from earlier, Etienne Jules Marey, created an early version of the movie camera, and he had his multiple images developed on one single piece of glass. So it wasn't until the invention of thin, light, flexible film that capturing movies, the way that we think of them today, really took off. This was made possible with the invention of something called celluloid. Everybody loves celluloid, right? People all around the world were experimenting with it. Celluloid is basically a combination of 2 things. Nitrocellulose, which is an organic cellulose, cell product. It's found in plants and woods, and also nitric and sulfuric acids. The byproduct of that is nitrocellulose, also called gun cotton. That's pretty cool. In its liquid form, it was used as a liquid bandage, but it also was spread on glass for photographic plates so they could capture the image. What is added to that gun cotton to make celluloid is another plant material called camphor. And this turned the syrupy liquid gun cotton into a solid piece of plastic. That's celluloid. Celluloid was first used for things like billiard balls and dominoes. It was a substitute for ivory. And it's the basis of most film moving forward. I mean, films today are still set on stuff like this. And it comes from plants. Bet you didn't know that, unless you did. I don't know. Actually, don't know what you know, but I assume you're tuning into Test Tube Plus because you want to know more stuff, because that's what we do. But sheets of celluloid film were being made and used all over the world. Once it was invented and we realized what we could do with it, I mean, this was a great substitute for glass. But it was still too thick to roll. You couldn't roll it up like you think of movies today. That doesn't mean you couldn't put a lot of them through a camera to document stuff, but you couldn't quite roll it up and create a long feature film yet. A lot of people think that George Eastman of Eastman Kodak fame, as the inventor of the flexible celluloid film, they thought he made this movie thing possible, right? Eastman Kodak, very famous, prior to the invention of digital cameras pretty much, but it was essentially another guy that did this, Reverend Hannibal Goodwin of the Garden State of New Jersey, that was the first to crack the case of a flexible, rollable, unbreakable celluloid film. Goodwin made it in his attic laboratory and applied for a patent in 1887. George Eastman didn't know how to do this yet. The problem is, Goodwin, he's not a scientist. Remember, Reverend Hannibal Goodwin, he's a preacher. So his application was a little bit vague on the explanation for how to make his celluloid film. I mean, if you've ever read a patent, the language is very specific and has to be very descriptive. So that way you don't cover too many things. It's just the thing you're applying for. So while Goodwin's application was being processed and stalled in the whole bureaucracy, Eastman and his chemist Henry Reichenbach began to develop a celluloid film of their own. And because they had the science background, they had the knowledge, and their patent ended up going through before Goodwin's, officially going through the US Patent Office in December of 1889. Goodwin obviously objected to this, and he finally won his own patent in 1898, 12 years after he'd originally filed it, and almost 10 years after Kodak Eastman had already started using it. And they'd been successfully selling celluloid film all over the world because they were the quote-unquote first. Now, they each received patents for their product, even though they essentially had competing ones, because they were slightly different. But over time, the Eastman Kodak company began to adjust their product to look more like Goodwin's, because his was better. Goodwin died December 31st of 1900. His widow sold his company that he created to sell this film. The company sued the Eastman Kodak company, and a U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals found in favor of Goodwin's claim. Kodak had to pay $5 million, which is over $100 million in modern dollars, and thought to have been about 5% of Kodak's overall total worth. Imagine if that lawsuit had been settled at the height of Kodak, right? If someone had invented the same thing and they took 5% of all of Kodak, that would have been insane if it happened in, say, like the 70s or the 80s. So an amateur chemist and a preacher was actually the one responsible for inventing flexible film that could make movies possible. I feel like someone should make a movie about that. It was also proven by a US court. I mean, gosh, I'd watch that. But even though Goodwin was finally acknowledged as the inventor, it was Eastman's film that was used in Edison's camera that popularized this process. In the first tests of what came to be one of the first movie cameras ever, celluloid film was used, and it was Eastman Kodak's film. Celluloid continued to be used to make every movie that you've probably ever seen until the advent of digital filmmaking. Of course, there were challenges for this. Cellulose nitrate, which is the basis of celluloid film, it's highly flammable stuff. If you store too much of it in one place and something bad happens, you lose all of your film. It was eventually replaced by something called safety stock. It was film stock that was less flammable, because think about it this way, it's not just film archive places. Because the films were so flammable, and I do mean so flammable, movie theaters would burn down because something happened in the projection room where there are hot light bulbs and people, and you know, a lot of people smoked back then. Just, you know, kind of riffing here, but essentially it was bad. It was a bad situation. The Kodak company actually won an Oscar for coming up with the safety film. And as you know, most early films were black and white. We are not even going to get into the colorization of film. It's a whole chemical process. It's very, very complicated. We can get into it if you want. Just let us know down in the comments or over on Twitter at TestTube. And of course, the big one when it comes to watching films today is that we don't actually watch film most of the time. If you're sitting in a theater and you don't hear that clickety-clackety coming from the projection booth, chances are there's not actually a film projector up there. Most of the time, they're just USB sticks, and just send them to the theater and plug them right in. A lot of projectors now are digital. They're still often captured on film, though. They just convert them later. Loading 35mm film into the projector and shooting it and watching it with all of its impurities and changing out reels at the right time, and it's a skill and it's really awesome, and I don't know about you, but it just makes my heart warm when I get to see a movie in that way. But today, digital has become the way of capturing movies and showing them because it's cheaper, it's easier to use, the cameras are lighter, you can project them more safely, you're not going to burn down the place by using a digital projector. Movies are also easier to ship and store and reuse. You can make infinitely many copies of a digital movie, and a lot of people feel that digital looks either the same or better than film. This is a huge debate on the internet. I prefer film. I think digital is very clear, but I just love the feeling of film. And it may really just come down to opinion or preference. But it all started way back in the day with heavy glass plates, the desire to capture motion, and a preacher in an attic. It's pretty cool. Really though, somebody make a movie about this. Get on it. Let us know down in the comments whether you like film or digital. What do you like better? And also make sure you subscribe so you get more TestTube Plus. Come back tomorrow where we're gonna talk about how it is that your chemical, jelly eyeballs can suck up all this information and turn it into a movie. Make sure you tune back in for that, and I'll see you tomorrow.